Hey, Reddit. I honestly never thought I'd find myself here, spilling my guts to strangers online. But I feel like I'm drowning and I need to get this off my chest. My name is Ethan, I'm 34, and I've been married to my wife Laura for 8 years. Or at least I thought I was. Turns out, I've been living a lie. Laura and I met in college. She was outgoing, full of life, and the kind of person who could light up a room with her energy. I was a little more reserved, but she brought me out of my shell. We dated for 3 years before getting married, and I truly believed we were happy. She was my partner, my best friend, the person I thought I'd grow old with. But over the last year or so, something started to feel off. At first, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Laura started spending more time out of the house, claiming she was busy with work or meeting up with friends. She got a little more distant, a little more secretive. Her phone was always glued to her hand, and she'd act defensive whenever I asked about her day. I told myself I was overthinking it, that I was just being paranoid. After all, we'd always been honest with each other, right? One night, while she was out with friends, I noticed something strange. Laura's best friend, Michelle, called the house looking for her. Michelle was confused when I told her Laura was out with friends, because as far as she knew, Laura wasn't with anyone in their usual circle. That was the first crack in the facade, the first sign that something wasn't adding up. Still, I brushed it off. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. But then the cracks started to widen. Her behavior became more erratic. She started dressing up more, buying expensive clothes she couldn't explain. Her excuses about where she was or who she was with got flimsier. And worst of all, she started treating me like I was an inconvenience in her life, like I wasn't worth her time. The final straw came one night when I got an anonymous message. It was simple, just a link to a video file and a single sentence. "You deserve to know the truth." I hesitated for a moment before clicking it, and what I saw made my stomach churn. The video showed Laura with my best friend, Jake. They weren't just talking, they weren't just laughing. They were together in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. That was the moment my world fell apart. I sat there, staring at the screen, unable to move, unable to think. The woman I had loved for years, the woman I had trusted with everything, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. And Jake, who had been my friend since high school, the guy who stood next to me at my wedding, the guy who held my son in the hospital when he was born. He was supposed to have my back, and instead, he stabbed me in it. But it wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the layers of lies, the realization that everything I thought I knew about my marriage was a facade. And yet, this was only the beginning. What Laura would eventually confess to me would make the affair look like a minor betrayal in comparison. Little did she know, I wasn't going to just roll over and let her destroy my life. I was about to show her, and Jake, that you don't mess with someone who has nothing left to lose. After watching the video, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't even begin to describe. Anger, sadness, betrayal, humiliation, they all hit me at once. I replayed the video over and over, looking for something, anything, that would make it less real. But there it was, clear as day. Laura and Jake, laughing, touching, kissing, and more. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the lights off, the video playing in my head on an endless loop. By morning, I was no closer to figuring out what to do. My marriage was crumbling. My best friend had betrayed me, and I felt like I was suffocating. That day, I decided I needed more than just the video. I wanted answers, proof, something I could confront her with that she couldn't talk her way out of. So, I did what any desperate person would do. I hired a private investigator. His name was Sam, and he had the kind of no-nonsense attitude that made me feel like I was in good hands. I handed over the video, explained my suspicions, and told him to dig up everything he could on Laura and Jake. The waiting was excruciating. Every day that passed felt like an eternity. Meanwhile, Laura acted like nothing was wrong. She'd smile at me over breakfast, ask about my day when I got home from work, and kiss me goodnight like she hadn't ripped my heart out and stomped on it. 2 weeks later, Sam called me with his findings. When we met, He slid a thick envelope across the table. "I think you'll want to see this," he said. Inside were photos, receipts, and copies of text messages that made my blood boil. The photos showed Laura and Jake meeting up at hotels, sneaking off during supposed work trips, and spending weekends together when I thought she was with friends. The text messages were even worse. She wasn't just cheating on me, she was mocking me. Messages like, "Ethan has no idea. He's so oblivious, it's almost cute," and "He's too boring to notice what's going on. You're the only one who makes me feel alive." But the most shocking revelation was that Jake wasn't the only one. Sam had uncovered evidence of a second affair, this time with a man named Tom, a coworker of hers. Tom was married, and his wife was pregnant. The thought of Laura entangling herself in another family's life, causing more pain and destruction, made me sick. I felt like I was drowning in betrayal. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built a life with, was a complete stranger to me now. But I wasn't going to let her destroy me. If she wanted to play games, I was going to show her just how dangerous it was to underestimate me. The next step was clear. I needed to confront her. But I wasn't going to do it without a plan. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to understand just how much she had destroyed. And more importantly, I wanted her to know that I wasn't the fool she thought I was. I spent the next few days preparing myself for the confrontation. I wasn't going to let my emotions take control. I wanted to approach this with a clear head and a solid plan. Laura was a master manipulator, and I knew she would try to twist the narrative. But this time, I had the truth on my side, and I wasn't going to let her wriggle out of it. That evening, as she came home from work, I was sitting at the dining table with the envelope of evidence in front of me. She walked in, still dressed in her pristine office attire, and gave me her usual fake smile. "Hey, Ethan," she said, setting her purse down. "How was your day?" I didn't respond. I just looked at her, my face emotionless, and gestured for her to sit down. She frowned, sensing something was off, but obliged. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone cautious. Without a word, I slid the envelope across the table. She hesitated before picking it up, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. Her face turned pale as she flipped through the photos and read the printed text messages. By the time she reached the end, her expression had shifted from shock to anger. This is an invasion of my privacy," she snapped, slamming the envelope onto the table. "How dare you spy on me?" "Privacy?" I said, my voice cold. "You're going to sit there and talk about privacy when you've been sneaking around with my best friend and a married man? Don't insult my intelligence, Laura." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, she crossed her arms and leaned back in her chair. "Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing Jake. And Tom. But can you really blame me, Ethan? You're so dull, so predictable. I needed excitement, and you weren't giving it to me." I stared at her, my chest tightening with rage. Her audacity was staggering. "You're seriously blaming me for your infidelity?" I asked, my voice rising. "After everything I've done for you, everything we've built together, this is how you justify betraying me?" "Oh, please," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Don't act like you're some perfect husband. You were never enough for me, Ethan. Jake made me feel wanted. Tom gave me the thrill I was missing. You were just there." Her words hit me like a freight train, but I refused to let her see how much they hurt. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "You think you've won, don't you?" I said, my tone low and menacing. "You think you can walk all over me and come out unscathed, but you have no idea what you've unleashed." She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, please, Ethan. What are you going to do? Cry about it?" I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "No, Laura. I'm going to destroy you." Her smirk faltered, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. She didn't know what I was capable of, and I intended to keep it that way, until the time was right. As she stormed out of the room, muttering under her breath about how childish I was being, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. She thought she had the upper hand, but she had no idea what was coming. After our confrontation, Laura acted like she had one. She avoided me for the next few days, barely speaking unless it was absolutely necessary. Her dismissive attitude only fueled my anger, but I kept my composure. I wasn't about to let her know what I had planned. While she continued to live her double life, I was busy setting the stage for her downfall. The first thing I did was gather more evidence. I wasn't just going to confront her in private. I was going to expose her in a way she couldn't escape. I reached out to Sam, the private investigator, and asked him to dig even deeper into her relationship with Jake and Tom. I wanted every detail, every text, every photo. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. Then, I contacted a lawyer. I explained the situation and showed him the evidence I already had. He assured me that with what I'd collected so far, I had a strong case for divorce. Not only that, but I could also pursue financial damages for emotional distress and, in Tom's case, potentially involve his pregnant wife in a legal case against both of them. The lawyer advised me to secure my financial assets immediately. I moved half of our savings into a separate account, ensuring Laura couldn't touch a dime when things inevitably blew up. I also started documenting everything, every conversation, every interaction, just in case she tried to spin the narrative in her favor. Next, I turned my attention to Jake. As much as Laura had betrayed me, Jake's betrayal cut even deeper. He had been like a brother to me, and the thought of him sneaking around with my wife behind my back made my blood boil. I decided he wasn't getting off easy either. I reached out to his girlfriend, Megan, under the guise of needing advice about a marital issue. Megan and I weren't particularly close, but we'd known each other for years through Jake. When we met for coffee, I laid everything out, the video, the photos, the texts. She was stunned, her face pale as I showed her the evidence. "I don't even know what to say," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "Neither do I said, my voice calm but cold. "But I thought you deserved to know." She thanked me and promised to confront Jake. I could see the pain in her eyes, and while I felt bad for her, I also felt a sense of vindication. Jake's world was about to implode, just like mine had. The final piece of the puzzle was Tom's wife, Ashley. She was about 8 months pregnant, and the thought of her being blindsided by her husband's betrayal made me sick. But I knew she deserved to know the truth, just like Megan. I found her contact information through social media and sent her an anonymous message with all the evidence attached. Once everything was set in motion, I sat back and waited. I wasn't just planning to expose Laura. I was preparing to dismantle her entire life, piece by piece. She had taken everything from me, and now it was time for her to pay the price. The morning everything started to unravel felt strangely calm. Laura left the house as usual, heading out with her bag slung over her shoulder, confident and oblivious to the storm about to hit. I stayed home, pretending I was working remotely, but in reality, I was watching the pieces of my plan start to fall into place. It began with Megan. True to her word, she confronted Jake with the evidence I'd given her. Later that day, I received a text from Megan. He admitted it. "We're done. Thank you for telling me. He doesn't deserve either of us." I stared at the message for a moment, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Jake was out of my life for good, but his betrayal still stung like hell. Then came the fallout with Ashley. Around noon, I got an email from her, not a phone call or a message, but an email. She wrote that she had received the evidence and confronted Tom, who had initially tried to deny everything. But when she showed him the texts and photos, he broke down and admitted the affair. Ashley thanked me for telling her, saying she deserved to know the truth before her baby was born. She also mentioned that she was filing for divorce and planned to inform Laura's workplace about their inappropriate relationship. It was happening. Laura's web of lies was beginning to collapse, and I hadn't even made my move yet. That evening, Laura came home, her usual smug attitude intact. She kissed me on the cheek and started chatting about her day like nothing had happened. It took every ounce of self-control not to confront her right then and there, But I reminded myself that this was just the beginning. Anything exciting happened today? I asked, my tone neutral. Not really, she replied, pouring herself a glass of wine. Just another boring day at work. I nodded, fighting back the urge to tell her that boring day at work wasn't what Tom's pregnant wife would have called it. The next day, the fallout truly began. Ashley had followed through on her threat and reported Laura and Tom's affair to their company's HR department. By noon, Laura called me in a panic, her voice trembling. Ethan, something's happening at work. They're saying there's an investigation into me and Tom. Do you know anything about this? Why would I know anything about it? I replied, keeping my tone calm. I thought you said work was boring. She didn't respond, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. I need to figure this out, she muttered before hanging up. By the end of the day, Laura's phone calls had become increasingly frantic. She told me that she and Tom had been placed on administrative leave while the company conducted their investigation. She was terrified, not just because she might lose her job, but because the investigation could uncover even more damning details about her behavior. But that was only the beginning. While Laura scrambled to put out the fires at work, I was preparing for the final, public blow that would expose her lies to everyone she cared about. She thought she could keep this contained, that she could control the narrative, but she had no idea what was coming. Laura was spiraling, and it showed. She was pacing around the house, snapping at me over the smallest things, and spending hours on the phone trying to fix the situation at work. She had no idea that her problems were only beginning. The HR investigation was the spark, but I was about to pour gasoline on the fire. It was time to set my final plan into motion. I had waited long enough. Laura's parents were hosting a family dinner that weekend, a big, formal affair with relatives and close family friends. She'd been talking about it for weeks, boasting about how everyone loved her and how much they respected her professional achievements. What better place to reveal the truth than in front of the very people she cared about impressing the most? The day before the dinner, I prepared everything. I printed out copies of the photos and texts, as well as the video of her confession about Jake and Tom. I even included a statement from Ashley detailing her husband's affair with Laura. I placed everything in a neat folder labeled The Truth and packed it in my bag. The night of the dinner, Laura was her usual smug self, acting as if she was untouchable. As we arrived at her parents' house, she immediately launched into her usual routine, chatting, laughing, and pretending to be the perfect wife and daughter. It was sickening to watch, but I played along, biding my time. When dinner was served, Laura's father stood up to make a toast. He talked about family, trust, and how proud he was of Laura for her career and her strong marriage. I nearly choked on my drink at the irony. When he finished, Laura stood up to say a few words of her own. She thanked everyone for their support and love, claiming she couldn't have achieved anything without her wonderful husband. The audacity of it all made my blood boil. As she sat down, I stood up. Actually, I said, raising my glass, I'd like to say a few words too. Laura shot me a confused look, but she didn't stop me. Big mistake. I've been keeping something to myself for a while now, I began, looking around the room. Something I think everyone here deserves to know. I pulled out the folder and placed it on the table. Laura, this is for you. Go ahead, open it. She hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached for the folder. The room was silent, all eyes on her as she flipped through the contents. Her face turned pale, then red, as she realized what I had done. What is this? She stammered, her voice shaking. It's the truth, I said coldly. The truth about your affairs with Jake and Tom. The truth about how you've been lying to me and everyone else here. And the truth about the pain you've caused, not just to me, but to Tom's wife and unborn child. The room erupted into chaos. Laura's parents were yelling, demanding an explanation. Her friends and relatives were whispering, their eyes darting between her and me. Laura, for once, was speechless. Ethan, how could you do this? She finally managed to say, tears streaming down her face. How could I do this? I shot back, my voice rising. How could you do this, Laura? You destroyed our marriage. You betrayed me, and you thought you could get away with it. Well, guess what? Now everyone knows the truth. I turned to her parents. You've always loved her more than me. You've always supported her, no matter what. But maybe now you'll see her for who she really is. Without waiting for a response, I grabbed my coat and walked out. I could hear Laura screaming my name, but I didn't look back. I had done what I came to do. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The aftermath of that dinner was nothing short of explosive. By the time I made it back home, my phone was blowing up with texts and missed calls from Laura, her parents, and even some of her friends who had been at the dinner. I didn't respond to any of them. I was done with explanations. The truth was out, and they could deal with it however they wanted. Laura came home a few hours later, her face streaked with tears and her makeup smeared. She slammed the door behind her and stormed into the living room where I was sitting. "How could you humiliate me like that?" she shouted, her voice trembling with anger. "In front of my parents, my friends, everyone. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I looked at her, unfazed. "I told the truth, Laura. Something you seem to have a hard time doing." "You ruined my life," she screamed, throwing her purse onto the couch. "Do you know what my parents said to me after you left? They told me I'm an embarrassment. They told me I'm not welcome in their house until I fix this mess." I leaned back in my chair, my expression calm. "Good. Maybe now they'll see the real you." She started pacing, her hands shaking as she tried to compose herself. "You don't understand. My job is on the line. My reputation is ruined. Everyone at work knows about the investigation with Tom, and now this? How am I supposed to come back from this?" "That's not my problem," I said coldly. "You made your choices, Laura. You decided to betray me, to lie to me, and to destroy our marriage. This is on you." She stopped pacing and turned to me, her eyes filled with desperation. "We can fix this," she said, her voice softer now. "Ethan, please. I'll do whatever it takes. We can go to counseling. We can start over." I laughed bitterly. "Start over? You think we can just erase everything you've done and go back to the way things were? Laura, you didn't just cheat on me. You tore apart our lives. You betrayed me with my best friend, with a married man, and you lied to everyone around you. There's no coming back from that." She sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," she whispered. I was unhappy, Ethan. I didn't know how to tell you." "You didn't know how to tell me, so you decided to sleep with Jake and Tom instead?" I shot back. "You had plenty of chances to talk to me, Laura. You chose this path, and now you're going to have to live with the consequences." Over the next few days, the fallout continued to spread. Laura's parents stopped speaking to her, ashamed of her actions and the public spectacle she had created. At work, the HR investigation into her and Tom escalated, with both of them facing potential termination. Meanwhile, Jake's ex-girlfriend, Megan, reached out to thank me again for exposing the truth. She told me she was moving on with her life and wished me the best in mine. As for me, I was finally starting to feel a sense of closure. Laura had taken so much from me, but I was taking my life back. I filed for divorce the day after the dinner, with my lawyer ensuring that I would come out of it with as much as possible. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything after what she had done, but I wasn't done yet. There was one final move I needed to make to ensure that Laura truly understood the weight of her actions. The day I delivered the final blow was the day I truly felt free. I had spent weeks setting everything up, ensuring that when it landed, there would be no way for Laura to escape the consequences of her actions. She had torn apart my life, betrayed my trust, and lied to everyone who cared about her. Now, it was time for her to face the full reality of her decisions. It all started with a delivery. Laura was still reeling from the fallout of the dinner and the HR investigation, and I knew she wasn't in any position to handle what was coming next. I had compiled everything: the photos, the texts, the video of her confession. I even included a timeline of her lies, carefully detailing the lengths she had gone to deceive everyone around her. All of it was sent to her workplace's HR department, her colleagues, and, most importantly, to her close circle of friends. But the piece de resistance was a final package delivered to Jake, Tom, and their families. Inside were not only the details of the affairs, but also a statement from me, explaining exactly how Laura's actions had impacted me and why I had decided to share the truth. It wasn't vindictive, it was justice. The fallout was swift. Within days, Laura was fired from her job. The HR investigation found that she and Tom had violated multiple company policies, and with the evidence I had provided, there was no way for them to deny it. Tom's wife, Ashley, who had already filed for divorce, took the evidence to her lawyer, ensuring that Tom would face severe financial penalties. Jake, meanwhile, found himself ostracized by our mutual friends, who couldn't believe the extent of his betrayal. Laura, of course, was furious. She stormed into the house one evening, her face red with rage. "You've ruined everything," she screamed. "I lost my job, my friends, my family, everything. And it's all because of you." I looked at her, calm and composed. "No, Laura," I said. "It's all because of you. You made these choices. You betrayed me, lied to me, and destroyed our marriage. I just made sure the truth came out." She glared at me, her hands shaking. "You're a monster." I smiled faintly. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just someone who finally decided he deserved better. The final blow wasn't just about exposing Laura. It was about ensuring that she couldn't manipulate anyone else the way she had manipulated me. By the time I was done, everyone in her life knew the truth about who she really was. There was no coming back from this. As I watched her pack her things and leave the house for the last time, I felt a strange sense of relief. The woman who had caused me so much pain, who had turned my life upside down, was finally gone. And for the first time in years, I felt free. With Laura gone, the silence in the house was deafening. For years, this place had been filled with her presence, her laughter, her arguments, even her lies. Now, it felt like a ghost town. At first, it was disorienting, like I didn't know what to do with myself. But as the days turned into weeks, that silence began to feel like peace. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly, thanks to the overwhelming evidence I had collected. My lawyer, who I now considered something of a miracle worker, ensured that Laura got the bare minimum. She tried to fight it, of course. She threw out every excuse in the book, claiming she had been emotionally neglected and forced into her actions by my coldness. But the evidence was undeniable. The judge ruled in my favor, and she left the courtroom with nothing but a defeated glare. As for Jake, he attempted to reach out to me several times. I ignored every call, every text. The man who had stood by my side as my best friend, who had been like a brother to me, was dead to me. Our mutual friends, who had initially tried to stay neutral, slowly started cutting ties with him as the truth of his betrayal became public knowledge. Megan, his now ex-girlfriend, sent me a message thanking me for being honest with her. She told me she was moving out of state to start fresh, and I wished her nothing but the best. Tom wasn't faring much better. His wife, Ashley, had filed for divorce and was moving forward with full custody of their unborn child. The company had not only fired him but was pursuing legal action for the misuse of company funds during his affair with Laura. The last I heard, he was living with a friend, trying to piece together what was left of his life. But this story isn't about them. It's about me and how I began to rebuild. At first, it was the small things. I started going to the gym again, something I had neglected during the chaos of my marriage. I reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with because I had been so consumed by my relationship with Laura. I even took up painting, a hobby I hadn't touched since college, and found solace in creating something beautiful out of the mess I had endured. I also started therapy. It wasn't easy to admit that I needed help, but sitting down with a professional and unpacking everything I had been through was one of the best decisions I ever made. My therapist helped me see that Laura's actions weren't a reflection of my worth. They were a reflection of her character. That realization was liberating. One day, while cleaning out the house, I stumbled upon an old photo album from the early days of my marriage. For a moment, I considered throwing it away, but instead, I sat down and flipped through the pages. The memories were bittersweet, a reminder of what could have been and what had been lost. But as I closed the album, I realized something. I wasn't that man anymore. The man in those photos was naive, trusting to a fault. The man I had become was stronger, wiser, and ready to move forward. As the dust settled, I began to see my life in a new light. What had started as a nightmare, a betrayal that shattered everything I thought I knew, had become a catalyst for change, for growth, for freedom. The Ethan who had walked into this storm was not the Ethan who had come out the other side. The house, which once felt empty without Laura, became a space of comfort and renewal. I redecorated, getting rid of anything that reminded me of her. The wedding photos came down, the furniture she had picked out was replaced, and the space slowly began to feel like mine. It wasn't just about erasing her. It was about reclaiming myself. Work became a welcome distraction. I poured myself into my career, and it paid off. Within months, I was promoted to a management position, and for the first time in years, I felt truly accomplished. My coworkers, who had been quietly supportive during my ordeal, celebrated with me. It was a small but significant victory. Therapy continued to be a lifeline. My therapist helped me process the betrayal, the anger, and the loss. One of the hardest things to accept was that I couldn't change what had happened. I could only control how I responded to it. That simple truth became my mantra, guiding me as I navigated this new chapter of my life. I also began to open up to the idea of dating again. It wasn't something I rushed into, but after some time, I found myself curious about what it would be like to connect with someone new. On the advice of friends, I joined a dating app, and while the experience was nerve-wracking at first, it reminded me that I was still capable of forming meaningful connections. One woman stood out. Her name was Sarah. She was kind, empathetic, and had a sense of humor that could brighten any room. On our first date, I told her about my past, not in a way that sought pity, but in a way that showed her who I was and what I had been through. She listened without judgment, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. As Sarah and I grew closer, I realized that what I had with her was completely different from what I had with Laura. There was no manipulation, no deceit, just honesty and mutual respect. She didn't fill the void Laura left. She helped me see that the void was something I had already filled on my own. Looking back, I've learned some hard but valuable lessons. Betrayal doesn't define you. How you rise from it does. Trust is fragile, and once it's broken, it's nearly impossible to repair. But most importantly, I've learned that it's okay to let go of the people who hurt you, even if they were once a big part of your life. To anyone reading this who might be going through something similar, know this. You are stronger than you think. The pain doesn't last forever, and with time, you will find your way to the other side. It's not easy, and there will be days when it feels impossible, but you are capable of rebuilding a life that is even better than the one you lost. As for Laura, I don't hate her anymore. I don't feel anger or bitterness. I feel nothing. She's a part of my past, a lesson I had to learn, and that's all she will ever be. The road ahead is mine to walk, and for the first time in years, I'm excited to see where it leads. This is my story, but it's not the end. It's just the beginning.